You're not being sabotaged in secret meetings. You're being destroyed in casual conversations by sentences you didn't think would matter. There's a specific kind of regret no one warns you about, not the kind that comes from big mistakes, but the quiet regret that hits hours after a conversation ends. When you replay your own words and feel your stomach drop. When you realize the damage didn't come from what someone else did. It came from what you said. Too fast, too honestly, too comfortably. It happens in moments that feel harmless. A sentence spoken in anger because you felt justified. A truth shared because you were just being real. A personal detail revealed because the room felt safe. You weren't trying to hurt yourself, you were trying to connect. And that's exactly why it works against you. Because the world doesn't punish intentions. It records outcomes. Here's the uncomfortable truth. You don't need enemies. You don't need betrayal. You don't need someone plotting your downfall. Your mouth does that work on autopilot. Every time you speak without thinking, you leave fingerprints. Every time you vent, explain, or overshare, you create a version of yourself that can be judged, remembered, and reused later. Think of someone like Eric, early 40s, competent, reliable, respected. One night he vents about work stress to a colleague he trusts, nothing extreme, just honesty. Months later, during a leadership review, that same honesty quietly reappears as doubt. Can he handle pressure? Eric never connects the dots, but the dots were connected the moment he spoke. This is why so many capable people feel stuck and confused. They keep doing everything right, yet opportunities slip away, not because they lack skill, but because they speak as if no one is listening, as if words evaporate instead of accumulating. Most people don't lose because they are weak. They lose because they speak as if no one is listening. Once you see how easily your own words turn against you, one question becomes unavoidable. If this keeps happening, who figured it out first? Long before social media, recordings, or modern workplaces, one man watched people destroy themselves the same way. By speaking at the wrong time. Machiavelli was not interested in manipulation the way people accuse him of today. He was interested in survival. He didn't study how to dominate others. He studied why capable people kept losing power they should have held. And the pattern was simple. They reacted instead of choosing. They spoke to relieve emotion instead of protecting their position. Machiavelli understood that power does not start with force, charisma, or intelligence. It starts with restraint, with the ability to pause when instinct demands expression, with the discipline to control your mouth when your ego wants relief. In his world, words were never just words. They were signals that revealed fear, impatience, ambition, insecurity, and hunger for approval. The people who rose were not colder or crueler. They were clearer. They didn't confuse honesty with exposure. They didn't mistake openness for strength. This isn't about becoming heartless. It's about stopping the habit of giving away leverage in moments you think don't matter. Think about how often you explain yourself just to feel understood. How often you talk to reduce tension. How often you justify instead of letting results speak. Each time feels harmless. Each time quietly weakens your position. Machiavelli saw that authority erodes fastest when you speak from emotion instead of intention. Silence, to him, wasn't morality. It was awareness. The awareness that not every truth needs to be spoken, and not every feeling deserves a voice. This video is not about talking less. It's about knowing when silence protects you. What keeps sabotaging you isn't random. It follows 9 situations that show up again and again in everyday life. After understanding that power begins with self-control, these situations are where most people fail to apply it. They don't look dangerous while you're inside them, but they quietly explain where capable people lose ground without ever realizing it. The first situation shows up the same way for almost everyone, through anger. Not explosive rage, but that sharp internal heat that tells you to speak now or lose yourself. Anger doesn't arrive as danger. It arrives as permission. Permission to finally say what you've been holding back. And the moment you accept that permission, your brain shuts off its filter. What should stay internal suddenly feels urgent to expose. Your mouth turns into an interrogation room, not because someone is forcing answers out of you, but because emotion convinces you that silence would be dishonest. When you're angry, you don't just express frustration. You reveal leverage. You show where you feel threatened, where pressure has been building, where you feel unseen. Think about a conflict at work. A colleague challenges your decision in a meeting. Your chest tightens, your tone sharpens. You respond fast. You mention long hours, unfair treatment, past effort. It feels like self-defense. But what you've really done is hand over a map of your stress points. Those words don't disappear when the meeting ends. Weeks later, they quietly resurface as doubts about temperament, reliability, emotional control. The same pattern plays out at home. A family argument starts small and escalates. Old frustrations spill out with precision you didn't plan. You reveal which comments hurt most, which roles exhaust you, which memories still sting. The argument ends, but the information stays. It gets remembered, it gets reused. Anger doesn't destroy information, it concentrates on it. That's why it's so valuable to others. Once someone knows how to trigger you, they don't need authority or strength. They just need timing. Anger feels powerful because it's loud. But loudness isn't power. Predictability is weakness, and anger makes you predictable. This isn't about suppressing emotion. Everyone feels anger. The difference is whether you let it speak for you, because anger doesn't reveal the truth. It reveals leverage. And every sentence spoken in heat becomes a permanent record of who you are when pressure hits. The second situation arrives quietly, disguised as comfort. No tension, no confrontation, just relaxation. A drink in your hand, laughter in the room. This is the moment most people misunderstand completely. Alcohol doesn't create new thoughts. It doesn't turn you into someone else. It simply shuts down the security system that normally keeps dangerous thoughts contained. With each drink, the filter weakens. The pause between impulse and speech disappears. What you say feels harmless because you feel safe. At a party, conversations blur together. Stories get looser. Details feel less important. You share frustrations you'd normally keep private. You joke about struggles you haven't resolved. You reveal plans, doubts, ambitions, and fears without noticing how clearly you're outlining your inner world. At a team dinner, it's even more subtle. You want to bond. You want to be real. You talk about workplace pressure, management issues, future moves. Everyone nods, everyone laughs. But not everyone forgets. Some people stay sharp while others loosen up. They don't need to ask hard questions. You volunteer the answers. What takes months to learn through observation gets handed over in a single evening. The next morning, you remember fragments. They remember everything. This is why the consequences of alcohol always arrive sober. The admission you thought was connected becomes context. The comment you thought was harmless becomes an interpretation. The story you shared for relief becomes leverage. None of it feels dangerous while it's happening. That's the trap. Comfort lowers defenses faster than conflict ever could. The most dangerous environments aren't hostile. They're friendly. They make you feel understood before they make you exposed. This isn't about avoiding social situations or becoming cold. It's about understanding what you're trading in those moments. Because clarity disappears faster than memory. And people don't need you drunk to use what you gave them. They only need you to forget that you ever said it. The most expensive secrets are given away for free after the third drink. The third situation appears when pressure closes in and silence starts to feel dangerous. Not anger, not comfort, just weight. Deadlines stacking up, expectations tightening, someone waiting for answers you don't fully have yet. Stress doesn't push you to lie, it pushes you to reveal. Under pressure, the mind looks for relief, and the fastest relief is often confession. You start explaining before anyone asks. You talk to lower the tension. You admit doubts to appear responsible. But what actually slips out isn't honesty. It's fear. It's uncertainty. It's the quiet belief that you might not be enough. Picture a deadline approaching fast. Your work isn't ready. A manager asks for an update. You could pause. Instead, you talk. You mention obstacles. You highlight how overloaded you are. You hint at risk. It feels professional. But what you've really done is expose insecurity that didn't need to be named, or think about a boss applying pressure. Questions come sharp. Expectations feel heavy. You start defending yourself instead of holding your ground. You say too much. You explain weaknesses that were invisible minutes earlier. In those moments, stress doesn't break you. It exposes you. People don't remember how hard the situation was. They remember how you sounded inside it. Pressure reveals what you believe about yourself when comfort is gone. It shows whether you trust your position or doubt it. And once that doubt is spoken, it can't be unheard. Others may sympathize in the moment, but sympathy isn't power. Respect is, and respect erodes when pressure makes you narrate your own instability. This isn't about pretending stress doesn't exist. Everyone feels it. The difference is whether you let pressure negotiate on your behalf. Strong people feel stress and tighten their communication. Weak positioning feels stress and loosens it. Because the real danger isn't failing under pressure. It's advertising your fear while still standing. Pressure doesn't break you. It exposes you. And what you expose under pressure becomes the story others tell about your capability long after the pressure is gone. So here's what all three situations really expose. It's never the anger, never the comfort, never the pressure. It's the moment emotion is allowed to speak for you. Every time that happens, you trade short-term relief for long-term damage. You feel lighter for a second and weaker for a year. Power doesn't disappear suddenly. It leaks out through emotional sentences you wish you could pull back. If this made you uncomfortable, good. That discomfort is awareness forming. Stay with me because the next cluster reveals how ego does the same thing, only louder, cleaner, and far more convincing. And this leads into the next cluster of three situations, all exposing the same failure point. The moment ego takes the microphone. Nothing explodes here, nothing looks wrong. Yet this is where people give themselves away with confidence instead of fear. The fourth situation emerges after you win. Not when you're failing, not when you're struggling, but when things finally go your way. Victory creates a subtle danger that most people never see coming. It makes you want to explain, to clarify, to walk others through how you did it. You don't call it ego, you call it openness. You call it being generous with knowledge. But every explanation is instruction. Every detail is a blueprint. The moment you start narrating your success, you begin teaching others how to replace you. Think about someone who just closed a major deal or earned a promotion. First, there's restraint. Then curiosity arrives. People ask how it happened, what strategy worked, what mistakes were avoided. And slowly, pride loosens the tongue. You explain the timing. You explain the shortcuts. You explain the thinking behind each move. It feels harmless. It feels deserved. But something shifts in the room. Admiration turns into analysis. Celebration turns into study. Your advantage stops being rare and starts becoming replicable. This is how power leaks after a win. Not through failure, but through celebration. The most dangerous thing about success is that it convinces you nothing needs to be protected anymore. You're relaxed, you're confident, you're proud, and pride speaks louder than fear ever could. The people who maintain power understand this instinct and resist it. They let results speak and silence guard the rest. They don't rush to be understood. They stay difficult to copy. This isn't about hoarding information or becoming secretive. It's about recognizing that not everyone asking questions is cheering for you. Some are mapping your moves. Some are preparing to imitate. Some are waiting for the moment your edge becomes common knowledge. Power doesn't survive by being explained. It survives by remaining slightly out of reach. Mystery keeps power alive. Explanation gives it away. The fifth situation doesn't come from anger or victory. It comes from something quieter and far more dangerous. The need to be seen, to be acknowledged, to be recognized as capable, important, connected. This is where over-explaining begins. You don't answer questions anymore. You narrate yourself. You add context no one asked for. You justify decisions that weren't challenged. You speak longer, not because clarity is needed, but because validation is missing. Then comes name-dropping, not blatant, casual, subtle references to people you know, rooms you've been in, conversations you were part of. It feels strategic. It feels like positioning. But what it actually signals is insecurity trying to dress up as confidence. In professional settings, this pattern is everywhere. A meeting turns into a performance. Someone shares an idea, and you feel the urge to prove you already knew it. You jump in with extra details. You connect it to past wins. You highlight your role. You want the room to notice. But the room does notice, just not the way you want. Over-explanation doesn't sound competent. It sounds defensive. Name-dropping doesn't sound powerful. It sounds needy. The more you try to prove your value with words, the more you suggest it isn't self-evident. This is the trap of ego-driven speech. It convinces you that talking more will secure your position when it's actually eroding it. The strongest presence in the room rarely feels the need to announce itself. Solid people don't rush to clarify who they are. They let behavior create reputation. They let results speak. The uncomfortable truth is this: when your value is real, it doesn't need narration. The urge to be seen often appears right before you give too much away. Because every extra sentence reveals how badly you want approval. And approval is a weak foundation for power. The need to be seen is often the proof of not being solid. The sixth situation hides behind a word people trust too easily. Promises. Not the kind made from strength, but the kind made to escape pressure. The moment expectations rise and certainty is demanded, your mouth looks for the fastest exit. You promise. Not because you can deliver yet, but because silence feels risky and honesty feels uncomfortable. In work, this shows up when deadlines close in And confidence is expected on command. You commit to timelines you haven't secured. You guarantee outcomes that still depend on variables you don't control. It sounds decisive. It sounds responsible. But what you've really done is convert pressure into debt. And debt always collects interest. The same pattern plays out in relationships. Someone needs reassurance. They want stability, clarity, commitment. Instead of slowing the conversation, you promise change, effort, a future version of yourself that hasn't been built. It feels caring in the moment. It feels like relief. But relief fades fast. Debt doesn't. Each unkept promise doesn't cause an explosion. It causes erosion. People don't confront you immediately. They adjust expectations. They stop relying on your word. They listen differently. Over time, your voice carries less weight, even when you're telling the truth. This is why experienced power players speak carefully about the future. Not because they lack ambition, but because they understand that reputation is fragile capital. They don't spend it to buy comfort in tense moments. They let action arrive first and commitment follow later. They choose restraint over reassurance. This isn't pessimism, it's precision. The sixth situation teaches a brutal lesson. Saying yes too early often means saying no to your credibility later. Ego loves promises because promises sound strong. Power avoids them unless they can be kept. Because reputation doesn't collapse all at once. It fades quietly, one promise at a time. These three situations don't destroy you through fear. They do it through confidence. Every explanation, every performance, every promise made too early quietly gives your position away. If you recognized yourself here, stay with me, because the next cluster exposes what happens when trust becomes the weapon instead. Machiavelli. The seventh situation doesn't arrive with pressure or ego. It arrives wearing empathy. Someone presents themselves as vulnerable, misunderstood, slightly wounded in a way that pulls you closer instead of pushing you away. This is where many people drop their guard without realizing they've done it. Fake weakness rarely looks fake. It's polished, balanced. The story makes sense. There's a clear villain, a clear injustice, and a clean explanation of why they deserve understanding. You see it with co-workers who describe being overlooked, mistreated, or taken advantage of, always with just enough detail to sound sincere. You see it in new relationships that accelerate intimacy, where personal pain is revealed early, carefully, almost elegantly. You listen. You empathize. You feel trusted. And that feeling is the entry point. Real vulnerability is messy. It contradicts itself. It leaks out at the wrong moments. Strategic vulnerability is controlled. It knows exactly how much to reveal and when to stop. While you're focused on being compassionate, the other person is observing. They're learning your values, your boundaries, your need to help, your tolerance for imbalance. Each comforting response tells them how much access they've gained. Over time, the dynamic shifts. You start making exceptions. You soften your standards. You explain away behavior you wouldn't accept from others. What began as empathy turns into obligation. What feels like kindness becomes leverage. This isn't about distrusting everyone or hardening yourself emotionally. It's about recognizing that some people don't share pain to heal. They share it to manage perception. And once guilt enters the picture, silence follows. You hesitate to pull back because it would feel cruel. That hesitation is the trap. Because guilt keeps you compliant, quiet, and exposed. The seventh situation teaches a brutal distinction. Real vulnerability is messy. Strategic vulnerability is polished. And only one of them expects something from you in return. The eighth situation reveals itself the moment a conversation feels a little too interesting. Someone lowers their voice, a name is mentioned. A detail slips out that wasn't meant to travel. Nothing feels hostile. Nothing feels risky. It feels social. But that's exactly the problem. The moment you repeat information that isn't yours to share, something subtle shifts. You stop being a participant and become a channel. Gossip isn't about curiosity. It's about transfer. Every piece of information moves power from one mouth to another. In work environments, this is constant. Someone talks about a manager's weakness. Someone hints at a coworker's mistake. Someone shares context to sound informed. The exchange feels mutual, but it isn't equal. The person speaking is spending power. The person listening is accumulating it. Over time, patterns form. Those who talk are known. Those who hold silence are watched. Gossip exposes more than secrets. It exposes discipline. Every time you pass information along, you demonstrate how you handle access. You show whether proximity makes you leak or tighten. And people remember that, not consciously, strategically. This is why the most powerful figures rarely gossip. They let others do it for them. They listen. They collect. They observe who betrays confidence easily and who doesn't. Betrayal flows downward because it attaches itself to those who can't resist the urge to speak. Information flows upward because it's drawn toward those who can hold it. The cost of gossip doesn't show up immediately. It shows up later. You notice fewer real details shared with you, fewer strategic conversations, less trust with substance behind it. You're still included, but never informed. This isn't about morality. It's about positioning. Silence doesn't make you invisible. It makes you unpredictable. And unpredictability is power. The eighth situation teaches a cold exchange rate. Speak to belong, and you lose leverage. Listen to understand, and leverage finds you. Information flows up, betrayal flows down. And finally, the ninth situation begins at the most tempting moment of all. The moment you feel morally justified to speak. Betrayal has already happened. Lines have been crossed. You're no longer guessing, you're certain. And certainty is dangerous. Because certainty tells you that silence is cowardice and exposure is strength. You replay conversations in your head. You remember promises they broke, truths they hid, private details they trusted you with. Suddenly, your mouth feels like a courtroom and you feel entitled to present evidence. But the moment you start talking, the damage shifts direction. You don't just reveal them, you reveal yourself. You show the world how you handle pain, power, and private knowledge when emotions are high. In professional settings, this often looks like clearing the air. Someone explains what really happened. They frame it as honesty. But what observers hear isn't justice. They hear volatility. They hear someone who speaks when hurt, someone who might do the same to them one day. In personal relationships, the cost is even higher. When you expose everything after betrayal, you don't look strong or principled. You look unsafe. People quietly learn that closeness with you carries risk, that intimacy might be repaid with exposure if things turn sour. This is why silence feels unbearable here. Silence feels like surrender, like letting them walk away untouched. But silence isn't surrender. It's delay. It's storage. It keeps options alive. Words feel powerful because they create immediate impact. Silence feels weak because it produces no applause. But power isn't measured by reaction. It's measured by position. Speaking spends leverage. Silence preserves it. And preserved leverage always outlives emotional satisfaction. This doesn't mean suppressing your pain or pretending betrayal didn't matter. It means choosing where that truth belongs. Not every truth needs a stage. Some truths are weapons best kept sheathed. The ninth situation teaches a final rule of power. You don't secure your future by burning someone else's past. You secure it by remaining unreadable when emotions beg you to explain. Silence keeps future leverage alive. What connects these three situations isn't what you said, but who you allowed close enough to hear it. Power didn't disappear by accident. It slipped away the moment access was given to people who knew how to turn it against you. If this feels uncomfortably familiar, don't brush it off. Stay with me, because what comes next is about learning how to choose who gets access to you before the cost becomes permanent. This was never about speaking less. It was always about speaking at the right moment. The people who lose control of their lives aren't the loudest by accident. They lose because they speak when emotion, ego, or pressure is holding the microphone. They confuse expression with strength and relief with power. In a world that never forgets, that mistake compounds fast. Words don't evaporate anymore. They're remembered. They're recorded. They're replayed without context and judged without mercy. One sentence spoken at the wrong time can undo years of careful positioning. Every conversation becomes a permanent data point about who you are under pressure. Power works differently. Power doesn't rush. It doesn't need to explain itself to feel real. It understands that silence isn't emptiness. It's control. When you don't immediately react, you keep options alive. When you don't explain too much, you stay difficult to replace. When you don't promise too early, you protect your credibility. This isn't manipulation. It's discipline. The discipline to decide which moments deserve your voice and which ones don't. Most people give themselves away, trying to be understood. They overtalk to be liked. They confess to feel lighter. They explain to seem fair. And each time they lose a little leverage they didn't know they had. The world rewards those who can hold tension without leaking information. It listens more closely to people who don't need to fill the silence. It trusts those whose words arrive rarely, but land with weight. Controlling your mouth doesn't mean becoming cold or distant. It means refusing to give the world ammunition against you. Once words leave your mouth, you don't control where they travel or how they're used. You don't get to edit the memory they leave behind. The strongest people understand this early. They learn that restraint isn't weakness, it's protection. This knowledge isn't about winning arguments or dominating conversations. It's about shaping a life where fewer things can be used against you, where reactions don't expose you, where silence becomes a strategic asset instead of an uncomfortable gap. Weakness shouts because it needs validation. Power whispers because it doesn't. If this changes the way you hear your own words, don't keep it silent. Drop a few words in the comments that describe what you're taking away from this. One sentence is enough. Subscribe if you want more of this perspective, because learning this early isn't motivation, it's leverage. And leverage, once gained, stays with you for life.